Thank you so much, Rolf, and good morning to you and good afternoon to all the participants. It's really a pleasure to join this panel and to offer some insights on the future of international maritime ecosystem and opportunities that we believe that this will create for countries like India. I've already been introduced. I'm here representing today the Getting to Zero Coalition. Let me see, we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the Getting to Zero Coalition was founded in partnership with the World Economic Forum, the Friends of Ocean Action, and then my organization, the Global Maritime Forum. And it gathers more than 200 organizations working towards our shared ambition of having commercially viable zero-emission vessels operating on deep seas from 2030 towards full decarbonization. And we are convinced that this can be achieved over the coming decades, but only if the full maritime value chain comes together and collaborates on creating solutions that move the needle on advancing this transition. So I would very much like to thank the GIZ, the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce, the Indo-German Energy Forum, and the Power2X Hub for their ongoing work and for bringing us together here today. And also would like to thank the opening speakers for the insightful remarks. So we can move to the next slide, please. So it is clear that shipping's energy transition will create a large future demand for zero-emission fuels, and that the technological challenges on the vessel side will actually not be the significant hurdle to overcome. And we already heard a bit about that from the previous speakers. In the Global Maritime Forum, we run an annual mapping of pilot and demonstration projects. And since we started this exercise 2 years ago, we've seen a huge growth in the amount of projects being undertaken globally. And we have our newest third edition, which will be released next month, which includes over 350 pilot projects relating to zero-emission shipping. What we can see in this mapping exercise also is that over a fairly short time span, large orders for zero-emission ready vessels are now being placed. Which represents then a fast pace of technological development and a potentially huge demand for scalable zero-emission fuels. In terms of fuels, we're seeing an increasing convergence around hydrogen-based fuels like ammonia and methanol for large ships. And in this year's edition, the coming one, we can see over 50 projects focusing on ammonia. And we're also now seeing that methanol vessels are reaching a state of commercial viability, so actually going beyond the pilot stage and entering the market as part of a move towards dual fuel capable vessels. And I think we'll be hearing a little bit more about that from our next speaker. But in order to move from pilot projects to an economy-wide transition, more leadership is needed at the political level, in particular through setting clear targets of full decarbonization through the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, and corresponding policy at the national and regional level. So in that sense, I fully agree with the participants in the webinar who also gave a lot of support to the relevance of policy. So clear targets, and then they need to be supported by policy measures such as a carbon levy and a fuel standard. And this would then help address the major issue which concerns the price gap between traditional and zero-emission fuels. And these new fuels also needing a significant investment in infrastructure. A study conducted by the Global Maritime Forum and UMass shows that the total investment in maritime decarbonization to close this gap amounts to between 1.4 and 1.9 trillion US dollars between 2030 and 2050. And of this, almost 90%, so around 87% of the investment will happen on the land side. So largely focusing on fuel production and supply. And this is important for countries like India, due to the fact that the areas of the world who are the most advanced in terms of the development of zero-emission vessels and pilot they don't necessarily have the renewable capacity to meet their future demands. So even though the majority of projects that we're seeing in the mapping are based in Europe or in Northeast Asia, countries able to build up their green hydrogen capacity will have a really important role to play in engaging with and ultimately benefiting from the transition to zero-emission marine fuels. We can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So in order for shipping to drive down its emissions and align with the goals of the Paris Agreement and ultimately decarbonize before 2050, zero-emission fuels and vessels must start to be deployed at scale already this decade. And while there is great potential for direct electrification of domestic shipping, such as ferries and coastal fishing, and as we heard alluded to earlier, there is already great efforts underway, and they can further be scaled up significantly. We also know that for deep sea international shipping, that's really not going to be an option. So making it necessary to identify a fuel capable of storing energy over longer distances. Fuels based on green hydrogen will be required to make this transition. With the leading candidates, as I mentioned earlier, referring to the mapping, is green ammonia and green methanol. And developing the green fuels necessary to decarbonize international shipping at scale will mean replacing 300 million tons of fossil fuels that the industry currently uses each year. So this obviously represents a huge future demand for green hydrogen. So meaning that the shipping sector could provide a strong early source of offtake for green hydrogen, driving down costs through economies of scale. And this could then ultimately drive uptake by other sectors like steel, chemicals, agriculture, and aviation. And in addition, replace some of gas's existing role in domestic heating and in the power sector. So for a country with a strong industrial base like India, this can really help to create several opportunities to green the economy while also fostering growth and supporting development goals. We can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So why India? Well, recent developments in India focusing on zero-emission fuels and green ports align well with the global trend towards sustainable, environmentally friendly practices. And as a country with a strong maritime tradition and infrastructure, India is well positioned to lead in this area, especially with its access to renewable resources and its wide range of industrial activities. By expanding its green ports, India can further enhance its connections to the global economy while also creating more jobs domestically. And in addition, India's strength in education and IT can play a critical role in developing and implementing new technologies and practices for sustainable maritime operation. We are aware of recent initiatives to unlock the maritime decarbonization opportunity for India, including the Center of Excellence for Green Port and Shipping and the promotion of hydrogen bunkering infrastructure at major ports. And these are positive steps towards achieving India's goals for sustainable maritime operations. I also wanted to touch upon India's hosting of the G20. We see this as an opportunity to exercise leadership in the area and to collaborate around ensuring that maritime decarbonization is full, timely, and inclusive, and including of emerging markets and developing countries, but also small island states and least developed countries. And this would complement the efforts by the G7, which was announced just today, the day before yesterday. So through its role in the G20, India could further seek to advocate for the increased availability of finance needed to achieve a greener and more sustainable future for the maritime industry, and especially for countries with less access to these funding. In addition to the potential economic and environmental benefits of green shipping, there are also social benefits to be gained. So, for example, promoting green ports can contribute to improved public health by reducing air pollution and noise levels in surrounding communities. And they can also promote the well-being of workers by providing a healthier work environment. Clearly, more work is needed to ensure that the safety of the new fuels is addressed, and also considering the role of the seafarers and the workers in the ports, and that adequate training for the handling of the fuels is secured. And importantly, by adopting sustainable practices in the maritime industry, India can help reduce its own greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate the impacts of climate change. And as we heard from one of the opening speakers, this is really important given that the shipping industry is responsible for a significant portion of global emissions, both domestically and internationally. We can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So trading hydrogen globally. In the future, India could emerge as a leading exporter of zero-emission marine fuels. So not only supplying ships with fuels for their own consumption, but also meeting demand from other sectors and other regions. So shipping will have an additional role to play in this regard, so providing the means to link together supply and demand globally, allowing green hydrogen to be produced at the location of the lowest cost, and then be transported by ship over long distances, so most likely in the form then of green ammonia. And to facilitate this, the vessels that would carry the ammonia could also or should also operate using hydrogen-derived fuels, so thereby providing a stable source of additional demand. We can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, I think I've made a bit of a PR pitch here for India and the opportunities related to shipping decarbonization. So then what would it take to actually unlock that opportunity? Well, I mean, India should build on its existing progress. Collaboration is vital, collaboration between public and private actors through public-private partnerships and creating a coordinated approach around developing the regulatory and physical infrastructure to support action. Finance is obviously key, as we also heard from a previous speaker. So creating a strong framework for supporting these developments will help to link available finance in Europe and Asia to project opportunities and to identify ways for these funds to drive investment into zero-emission fuel production. And in this context, there is also a specific need for concession of finance in order to de-risk projects and unlock commercial investment. Green corridors is a very popular concept at the moment, and we believe they have a really important role to play. Green corridors, they can link up supply and demand. So green corridors are specific trade routes between major port hubs where zero-emission solutions have been demonstrated. And they can be used to develop the infrastructural, regulatory, and technological conditions required to make zero-emission shipping competitive along a specific route and ultimately stimulate wider uptake. And lastly, as I already mentioned earlier, and that you all mentioned in the poll, there's a role for policy. So India should seek to support higher ambition levels through the International Maritime Organization, in particular with regard to setting a clear zero target and the establishment of a price on carbon. Supporting such policy measures would help close the gap between traditional and zero-emission fuels globally, so driving investment into green hydrogen and zero-emission marine infrastructure. So such a price signal will really be necessary to unlock the opportunities that I've described. In addition, if there's a carbon levy, there will be revenue that can be collected from the mechanism that can also be distributed to countries like India to support their transition. And this can be used then to support a just and equitable transition offsetting increases in trade costs and supporting the development of national opportunities and financing wider climate adaptation. So just to conclude, our ability to decarbonize our economies and ensure that the 1.5-degree target that was set out in the Paris Agreement remains within reach, it depends on our ability to support the development of a global hydrogen-based economy. And there's a strong support for this from the industry side. With the Getting to Zero Coalition, we developed a call to action for shipping decarbonization before COP26, and we had more than 250 organizations signing up to it. And there's also a wide buy-in to that ambition from all the major industry associations. Having said that, I want to emphasize that our members, they're taking risks by acting like front runners and first movers. And they are doing this because they know that the change has to happen, and they believe that it has to happen and that it's real. So I would really like to urge Indian stakeholders to be part of this journey because the transition has to be global and it has to be inclusive. And for that to happen, we need India to be part of it. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Ingrid. So that's a talk. Very much, very good. Brilliant. So thanks for leading us through the agenda, and also for decarbonizing shipping. Someone needs to mute. And the thank you, and then also really a plea for India. So pitch for India. So I'm sure that many people enjoy that. We have one question already from the audience, which is, I'm not sure if this is when we get into those classical questions. What's better, ethanol or ammonia? Methanol has carbon, but ammonia has NOx.
Yes, I think that's the million-dollar question, right? Which is the fuel? I think that from the Getting to Zero Coalition, we are technology neutral in the sense that we see that there is a role for a range of different zero-emission fuels. What we emphasize is that they need to be zero on a well-to-wake basis, and they need to be scalable. So I think that some fuels that have more of a bio component, there will be some restrictions when it comes to their scalability. But we believe that there's a role for a mix of different fuels to decarbonize the entire sector. We also think that some fuels are better suited for some types of vessels and some types of routes. So that's my diplomatic answer.
Yes, exactly. I was about to say that I think the best practice and the best thinking, current thinking at the moment is ammonia for large, long distance, methanol for medium distance, and there's a route for both. And actually, when it comes to carbon, yes, that is a challenge in methanol. But obviously, we're trying to use renewable carbon so that it's at least delay it. And in ammonia, there's work ongoing on the NOxes, so that in the fertilizer industry, there are filters that can be used, catalyzers to filter out NOxes. But there's also work going on I heard it last week with the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany on having ammonia fuel cell engines, which are then completely NOx-free. So there's technology that's in the works, that's for sure. Very good, then I think, thank you very much. Let's go on. But before we go on, I have this is more to tease the audience. This is a question, another question again. So thank you, Ingrid. A teaser question to test your maritime trivia knowledge. I'm asking the Sanjita. Can you pull up the question, please? So how many ports were there already equipped globally to trade with ammonia in the year 2020? And of course, ammonia, I can see, is highly dangerous, safety issues. So there'll be one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is ammonia has been around for decades. So it's already being shipped. And so 2020, so if ammonia is to be the green shipping fuel of the future, how many ports are already equipped to trade and to ship ammonia today, or they were ready 2-3 years ago? So there's good answers either way. I've tried to confuse you as best as I can. So you have to make up your mind really what makes the most sense. I missed a question. Ingrid, are you still there? So, oh my God, I missed questions. So, and what is so we see a very mixture of things. 36 is the dominant, 55, 13, 13, and 180. So the truth is actually 120 ports were already registered equipped to deal with ammonia in the year 2020. 120. And ammonia, actually, there are safety issues, but they can deal with it. And there are already 200 LNG tankers that can also ship ammonia, of which 40 are ready on any given day, are already shipping ammonia globally. Let's see, Ingrid, are you still there? I think I missed some questions. I think I missed a question. If not, then fine.
I'm still here.
You're still here. We have a second. Is there possible to have green fuel vehicles within ports? Operations for operations like Kalmar crane, gantry cranes, and so on. Very specific issues. So on port vehicles, Kalmar trains, gantry cranes.
Well, that's a good question. So what I know is that there are wind technologies being developed and tested on vessels, and they are seen as a complement to a fuel ship because they can increase the energy efficiency of the ship, so reduce the need for fuels. But that's not really wind turbines. I think they have a different shape. So I don't have the exact answer to this question.
Okay. Another question was, do you think that regulation will drive the benefit on shifting to green fuel?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I can see.
Do you think regulation will drive or benefit shifting to green fuel?
Well, I think that what we've seen now is the industry really moving in advance of regulation. And this is why we have the pilot projects, for example, and we see companies coming together, forming consortia because they believe that this transition will happen. And as I mentioned in my remarks, you know, they're acting as first movers, meaning that they're taking risks and investing in something that is not commercially viable at this point. I think that that's something that can happen up to a point, and after that there needs to be a regulatory response. And I'm sure that Sanne, who will be speaking next, has a more elaborate answer on that. But what we hear from our members is that, you know, they're really keen to drive this transition. But at some point, if this is to take place at scale, then there needs to be regulation. And I think that regulation, it has to happen at the International Maritime Organization level, so at the international level. But in parallel, there is a lot that can be done on the national level and on the regional level. So, for example, in the EU, there is the case of the EU Regional Response, EU Fit for 55. So there are definitely different levels of policy and regulation that needs to come in.
Good. Okay, so I'll take up your point. We'll ask the next speaker before she gets into the presentation. There was just one more question to make sure that audience knows that questions are taken seriously. There was a question on port vehicles using hydrogen, and probably, I mean, my sense is I think it is one of the biggest American fuel cell producers already has in buildings. They already have cranes which are using hydrogen fuel cells. So presumably it's a question of economics. You can do it for ports as well. So the question was, do gantry cranes and Kalmar cranes, do they use fuel cells or hydrogen? But it's probably small applications. My sense the fuel cell would work, but I'm not sure.
So what we know from our members is, so we have a number of ports that are members in the Getting to Zero Coalition, and they have other types of vessels where they're testing different technologies like hydrogen, for example. That could be tugs or pilots. So I think that that's sort of something that's a first step to do before you move to the deep sea vessels. So yeah, I would say that yes.
Okay, and the last one that I close to make sure we move on. Can we go for H2 as a fuel instead of NH3 or methanol? Fuel discussion. My sense is no, but it's just not efficient, and you have the boiling points in the hydrogen. You get into this very long discussion.
Yes, and also the fact that hydrogen takes up a lot of cargo space. So for really long journeys, that would probably not be the preferred option.
Exactly. So this is like an hour-long discussion that fuel. I have getting into the physics of hydrogen. Let's close it there. So Ingrid, thank you again very much for joining.